everybody, welcome. My name is April Toy. I'm the Secretary of ASE's National Leadership Council. I am also an attorney, a partner with the law firm of Hinshaw and Culbertson. For those of you who are on with us today and are new to ASE, it stands for Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement. ASE is the country's leading professional organization for the career development of Latinos, and we have a global network of over 85,000 professionals. ASE supports our members in every phase of their career, from students to experienced professionals. We have leadership programs, recruitment opportunities, and professional development. We also work directly with our employer partners to support their DEI strategies and initiatives. If you haven't already, sign up for a free membership at aseonline.org/getting started. I think we have the link in the chat for anybody who has not yet signed up. Today, we are here for a fireside chat with Julissa Arce about her new book, You Sound Like a White Girl, The Case for Rejecting Assimilation. There will be times for questions following the fireside chat, so please feel free to drop your questions in the chat box and we will bring them up following the fireside chat. Julissa Arce is the best-selling author of My Underground American Dream and Someone Like Me. She is a social justice advocate and a former Wall Street executive. Julissa immigrated from Mexico at the age of 11 and was undocumented for almost 15 years, some of them spent rising to prominence on Wall Street. She made national and international headlines when she revealed that she had achieved the American dream of wealth and status at Goldman Sachs while undocumented. So to start off our conversation, can you please define for our audience today what you mean by assimilation in your book?
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me. It's always a great day when I get to spend time with ASE. Just as a little anecdote, I interned with ASE when I was a sophomore in college. So I have a special place for ASE in my heart, as they've been a part of my journey for a long time. So to your question, so you sound like a white girl. The name and the title of my third book. That title really came from this idea of assimilation, and I'll get to your question in just 1 second. But the reason that the book is called "You Sound Like a White Girl" is because it's something I heard growing up, particularly from this boy in high school that told me I sounded like a white girl, and later on, people within the Latino community telling me I sounded like a white girl, and therefore I maybe was not Mexican enough or was not Latina enough. But it's interesting because a lot of white people will say, well, you don't sound like a white girl. And I'm like, exactly, I don't. So it's sort of this interesting dynamic, which I think the title really sort of encapsulates the double-edged sword that is assimilation, because on one side, we are asked to become similar to something else. And that's the literal definition of assimilation, is to become like something else, to absorb nutrients, it says in the dictionary, in our case, to absorb a culture. But it never, I have found in my personal experience and in throughout history, that anytime we have tried to seek belonging through assimilation, it's never really worked out for us. It's always sort of backfired. And so I feel like assimilation leaves us in this no man's land where we don't quite achieve or become American enough. And at the same time, we get further and further away from our own culture, our own heritage. And so to me, that's sort of the definition of assimilation. It's sort of this like no man's land. And in the book, I use this analogy of a snake to say that to say that like a snake is able to shed its skin to grow and to heal. So it changes, it evolves, but at the core, it gets to remain a snake. And assimilation is not like that. Assimilation, when we are asked to assimilate, there's no room for us to keep our own culture, our own heritage. And so, in the book, I call for us to do things differently, to reject the idea of assimilation and to instead create and find spaces where we can truly and fully be ourselves.
Yeah, and I was, you kind of hit on some of the things that really stood out to me in your book, and I was really surprised when you had mentioned that, when you were talking about that comment that that boy made, that you sound like a white girl, and, some of the distance that you felt with your family from, losing some of your Spanish and losing some of that culture, that identity. I really appreciated that about your book. So one of the questions I had for you, and this is actually something, it randomly came up just a couple of weeks ago. I was at dinner with a friend who's a senior partner at a law firm. She's also Latina. And she was telling me this story about an attorney, a younger attorney, had confided in her that she had been told during her annual review that she needed to have more confidence. And she was hurt by the comment because she felt it was insensitive and ignored the fact that she had been raised to be deferential. My friend was also hurt for the attorney because she could relate. But at the same time, she wasn't really sure what to say because as a litigator, part of your job is to stand up and have confidence and persuade a jury to agree with you. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how to navigate situations like this, where a requirement of your profession is maybe at odds with your culture.
Yeah, when I read the question, sort of like in prepping, there's a few things that really struck me about the question and about sort of like the situation. So one, I think that it's a false narrative that Latinos are not raised to have confidence. I think that's like this myth that I don't know where it started. That we are somehow raised to be like this meek people, and certainly there are parts of our culture that when we think about sort of like how we are raised to listen to authority, and sometimes those authority figures are wrong, and we're not necessarily raised to sort of like, it's always sort of like people who are older than you just sort of respect them, right? But it's not about confidence, it's about respect. It's about sort of respecting elders. And so I think part of it is that there is this myth that we weren't raised with confidence. I was raised to have so much confidence. Like my dad would always tell me, you can do anything that a boy can do. And so he taught me how to change a tire, and how to change the oil in a car, and how to drive, and how to do all of the things that he might have taught my brother, right? My mom always raised me to tell me that no is not always the final answer, right? That you can always try again and try different avenues to sort of achieve the things that you want, even when there's doors closed in front of you. If a door closes, a window might be open. And so one, I think that's, that needs to be said, that like, we sort of need to stop perpetuating this myth that as Latinos, we're not raised to have confidence, because I think many of us Latinos do have a lot of confidence and are taught by our own parents to carry ourselves with confidence. So that's one thing. The other part of it is this idea that, like in the specific example, you're saying to be a litigator, you have to have confidence. And so, I think that there are certain professions, like, for example, in order to be a surgeon, you need to have a really steady hand, right? Like I don't have a steady hand. And so I wouldn't be able to be a surgeon because I don't have a steady hand. But that has nothing to do with my culture. It's nothing inherent in my upbringing that is preventing me from being a star basketball player. Like that's just not a skill that I have. But or a surgeon, or an artist, or many other professions that I just don't have those skills, and it's not skills that I have honed in. So and then the third thing is about the difference between perception and how we are perceived versus how we actually like operate. So for example, right, you might not know, and people who are listening to this might not know, that I actually get really nervous speaking in front of audiences, and I've spoken in front of like thousands of people live. So the perception might be, I don't get nervous. I'm a really great speaker, and I am, but I've had to practice to be, I'm holding a pen in my hand, because holding a pen in my hand helps me to be less nervous when I'm speaking to people. And so, and sometimes sort of in smaller circles, my friends might not think that I'm just like super outgoing person. Like I tend, I can definitely be more quiet sometimes. So I think, the perception of how this associate carries herself in sort of the office might be very different as to how she would perform in front of a jury after she's practiced her closing arguments, and after she's practiced in front of a mirror and in front of friends, and is prepared, so I just think that I would just say like those three things, right? When I think it's sort of like breaking down this myth that we all inherently in our culture are raised a certain way. The second, that there are things that we might not be good at, but they're not inherent in our culture. And the third thing is to really separate between perception and reality, and how someone might perform in a certain scenario given the preparation that they've had. And then the last thing I'll say on that question is that sometimes I think that there is a real unfairness into how, and this is just outside of the Latino culture, this is sort of like in general, I think that people who tend to be more outgoing, or people who are extroverts, unfairly are perceived as having more confidence than someone who is an introvert. And that, I think, is something that all of us need to sort of challenge and change, because just because someone is quiet or someone is an introvert doesn't mean that they're not smart. It doesn't mean that they're not confident. It doesn't mean any of those things. And so I would say that the way that we should navigate them is to sort of push back against some of those misconceptions, and really create space for people to be themselves and to be able to carry themselves with their own personality and their own qualities that are unique and specific to them, and that ultimately might be the thing that makes them shine.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for that. I think that's very enlightening. As you were kind of talking through it, I started to wonder, if maybe it was something more about the interpersonal dynamics between maybe her partner and her as an associate. And maybe that's what she was getting at, because I do that. The story did strike me the same way it struck you. I'm like, well, I'm Latina, I have confidence. I get up in front of a courtroom, and it's very enlightening. Thank you so much. I have another question for you, and it's more geared at kind of a running theme that I saw in your book. And you talk about the impact of false historical narratives of events, such as the Alamo, and how that continues to affect how Latinos, Hispanic, Latinx community is viewed today. do you have any suggestions about how we can reclaim that narrative for ourselves?
Yeah. So, the book has quite a bit of history in it. I would say that the history part of it outweighs even like the personal experiences that I share in the book, because to me, understanding our history and the history of our people in this country really helped me to realize and recognize that the roots that connect me to Mexico are the same roots that connect me to this country, and just how much this country belongs to me. I didn't include this in the book because I actually didn't think about it until later, but I remember my mom telling me that living in the United States was like visiting una casa ajena, like somebody else's house, right? And I think that's a big difference between how my mom viewed this country and how I view it, which to her, this was sort of like somebody else's house and we sort of were visitors, where I very much view it as like, this is my house, right? And when something is wrong, like I want to fix it. I don't want to just accept that the pipe is broken and leave it broken. Like I want to fix it because I live here and this is mine. But to answer your question about how do we reclaim that history, and when you're talking about the Alamo, I grew up in Texas, and the Alamo was always this story about freedom and David Crockett and I forget all their names now, like the heroes of the Alamo and the Texas heroes, right? They were just sort of put on a pedestal and made sort of mythical in stature, when in reality, the fight for the Alamo was a fight so that these this white immigrants to Mexico who were invited by the Mexican government, slavery was outlawed in Mexico, and they had brought with them like 5,000 enslaved people in violation of Mexican law. And so this fight for independence was really also a fight to keep people enslaved. And so sort of understanding sort of the true real history of these things, and the history of how all of these things have affected Mexican Americans, and more broadly the whole Latino diaspora, has really helped me to view things in a completely different light, and even sort of like not just the things that our people have gone through, but all the beautiful ways in which we have shown up for ourselves. Like some of the largest student protests, some of the largest student walkouts to protest better education, to protest for bilingual education, to protest for ethnic studies, to protest to be able to be cheerleaders, because I share a story of these cheerleaders in Texas, that these Mexican American girls who couldn't be cheerleaders because their school had a rule that only one of the four cheerleaders could be Mexican, in a school that was 85% Mexican. And these girls organized and they walked out for 17 days. And so they created this like beautiful change. And it really helped me to understand that, going back to your previous question, that like we are a community that has stood up for ourselves, that has gotten loud, that has fought for our rights. And so history to me is really, really critically important. Not to be like, not to like boast my own book, but I do think that it's a good starting point, right? Like if you want to start learning about history, I think my book is sort of a good starting point. And in the back of the book, in the notes section, there are a bunch of other books that I read in research for my own book that I think are critical for all of us to learn. So books like A Latinx and African American History of the United States, books like Manifest Destinies and Inventing Latino, books like A Wicked War. So there's just like all of these incredible history books that really tell a more full version of the facts. They give a fuller picture of the history of the United States, a history that very, very much includes us.
Thank you. And I have to say, I learned so much in reading your book. And when you brought up the story of, you're just talking about Diana, right? The cheerleader. I loved that story and how you could relate as a former cheerleader yourself. I have to say, like, you know, I know we're going off script a little bit here, but the thing that I really, really, really adored about your book is that, you know, I have a very different experience than you. And I could 100% relate to everything that you were saying, because you took so much time and care to really examine a broad, the broad experience of Latinos in this country. And you really went into the history of who we are and talked about, you know, many of the topics that are maybe not applicable to you personally, but are certainly the topics that we are talking about as a community in general. So thank you for that. And so one thing that I wanted to ask you is, in your experience, how does assimilation show up in the workplace?
Yeah, well, you know, I've thought about this a lot, because I think that sometimes when we tell people to act professional, or we have sort of these guidelines for what being professional means, I think a lot of those guidelines are rooted in whiteness, and they're outdated rules for what it means to be professional. So I think sometimes being professional or asking someone to be professional is just another way to tell them to assimilate, to a certain standard, a standard which was not created with us in mind. So one example, right, that I use this in the book, which I say, who sort of made up this rule that wearing pearls is professional, but wearing big hoop earrings is not? And I didn't actually answer this question in the book, but that question kind of stayed in my mind, and I looked into it, and it really goes back to sort of a very elitist white thing of pearls used to be worn only by very rich ladies, right? And so that's what became professional, was wearing pearls, because it sort of signaled a certain that you were part of a certain class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of has trickled down to pearls being professional, and again, like big hoop earrings are not. And like, by the way, like, I love wearing pearls sometimes. You know, I still have a lot of the pearls that I wore when I was at Goldman, and I still love wearing them. But I no longer wear them with the thought of, this is professional, this is what I'm supposed to wear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we sort of need to break those sort of like rules, because I do think that, you know, if I am a professional, then what I am wearing should also be considered professional, because I'm wearing it and I'm already a professional. And so yeah, I think that we need to change some of those sort of rules that can be a little antiquated. And you know, we kind of are. I mean, when I think about, for example, like Black women, and the ways in which they have been belittled and left behind in the workplace, because perhaps of how they wear their hair, or their hairstyles, or even in school, right? Like, we hear sort of stories of kids who were wearing dreads or braids, and they're getting expelled from school, or like literally forced to cut them down in order to participate in certain athletics. And all of that, I think, needs to go away, because professionalism needs to also be culturally specific.
Yes. And I do have my pearls on today.
I love them.
I'm like, oh, crap.
No, it's not.
Taken.
Listen, I still have my pearls, I have my little pearl earrings, my pearl bracelets, you know, and I love them. But again, I think it's just that I feel like these things that we've all learned, right? it shouldn't be sort of like the measuring stick, like the standard, you know, like
Yeah.
we got to understand where these standards came from and how they were not made with us in mind.
Exactly. And the inclusion of pearls should not exclude everything else. It's not, you know, it's not the uniform. Sorry, I just thought that was funny because I remember reading that in your book and I'm like, oh, maybe I should put on
No, please. I'm not a pearl hater.
I know. I didn't take it that way. Can you share for our employers that are on today how they can make some efforts to be truly inclusive?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it was, you know, part of which we sort of talked about in the last question, right? Like that you've got to, if we're really going to be sort of like, I think sometimes like diversity, equity, inclusion, like even the words that we use to describe, which we're really seeking, which is justice, right? To have sort of like just work environments that don't, because I think sometimes when we say, okay, we are a diverse workforce because you have Black people, you have Latinos, you have Asians, you have Black Latinos, you have all sorts of different kinds of people. And so you look at your workforce and you say, we're making great progress. We are diverse. But if all those people who work there who are not white still feel like they have to be white or act white or try to emulate their white colleagues and their white male colleagues in order to advance in the workforce, then that's not really being inclusive, right? If we're saying, okay, we're going to be inclusive, that really has to mean that I can show up to an office wearing what I'm wearing right now, and nobody look at me funny or nobody think that they missed the Cinco de Mayo memo, you know? Like, it really has to be that I can show up as my full self and that I'm not going to be judged, that certain opportunities are not going to be out of my reach because of the way that I speak, because of the way that I talk, because of my culture. I had a friend recently who shared with me that he had been at this company for 10 years and he recently left. And once he left, he was talking to some more senior colleagues of him, former colleagues of him. And they told him that one of his former bosses had said to them, you know, X, Y, and Z person was really great, but he was too Mexican. He acted too Mexican to be promoted. And, you know, these are all the things that go unsaid and that you only find out about them until after you leave. And if somebody's willing to sort of speak up about it, right? And to me, it's like, if somebody had told you that, I feel like you should have spoken up at that moment, because what does it even mean to be too Mexican, right? But this happens, like these things happen every single day in workplaces, and we have to speak up when we see them. We have to truly have workplaces and work environments that celebrate our uniqueness, that celebrate our culture, that truly celebrate being diverse, inclusive places. Because otherwise, if all we're doing is bringing different people together, but still kind of forcing them to act a certain way in order to move up the ladder, then those efforts are falling short.
Yeah, I agree with you. And, you know, in my profession, I've certainly, at the firm I'm at now, I have to say that, you know, I truly believe it's an inclusive environment, and it's the reason why I am where I am. But in past experiences, I've seen a lot of emphasis on diversity, but not on the inclusion piece. And that is very frustrating.
Yeah.
So I think we are just about time to start questions for the audience. Is there anything else you want to share before we go to questions from the audience?
You know, the only thing I just kind of want to acknowledge, I actually last week canceled all the events that I had because of what happened at Robb Elementary School, and it's a week today, and I just don't want to leave without acknowledging that this happened, and also because, whenever there are mass shootings, most people's attention span is 3 to 4 days. And the news coverage moves on and we move on. And I just really want to encourage all of us to not look away from this, because these kids looked like any of our kids look like. And in different ways in which you want to get involved, like, please do. You can write letters to the surviving kids. You can have your kids write them letters. You can donate. You can get involved with different different ways for different reforms, whether it's gun restrictions or mental health. There are so many ways to get involved, and I just really hope that everyone does. I was in Uvalde over the weekend, and it's a beautiful community, but it's really a community that is hurting, and a community that is going to require a lot of resources for many, many years to come. And so please don't look away. Please stay involved.
Thank you for that. I think really important message. So I'm going to turn to questions from the audience, if that's okay now. Okay. So the first question I have up in the chat is, what are some examples of rejecting assimilation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think rejecting assimilation to me is about little ways in which I exert myself and my culture and my heritage, and then like big ways in sort of like the learning of our history, right? So I just kind of try now to really show up as my full self, like everywhere that I go, not leaving like little pieces of me at home in order to fit in certain spaces. And those are like small things that we can all do, but there's also sort of bigger ways that are more systemic, structural ways. Things like learning sort of like the true, real history of this country. As I said, a history that includes us, because we have been in the United States since before it was called the United States. We have fought in every single war, the War of Independence, World War II, Vietnam, like every single war that this country has ever fought. Our people have died fighting in those wars. And, as I'm sure, I don't know if many of you know, but last year, an organization called the Friends of the Smithsonian Latino Museum, which I'm on the advisory board, the organization has been around a lot longer than I've been involved, but they were basically fighting for there to be a Smithsonian American Latino Museum. And that bill was passed last year, which is like a really huge win. But now the next step of this is making sure that the Smithsonian builds the museum on the National Mall, which is where all the major Smithsonian museums are. And they have not given any indication that that's what they're going to do. And so the fight continues for us to sort of create that and like reach out to the Smithsonian, write them an email and say, I am one of the 60 million Latinos in this country, and I want that museum to be built on the National Mall. So those are, I think, like bigger ways in which we reject assimilation. But I think, to me, rejecting assimilation is only half of it, and the book is sort of structured in this way. The first half of it is about the lies of assimilation and dismantling, and then the second half of the book is about reclaiming. And so I think that in that rejection, there also needs to be that reclaiming, right? Like reclaiming of our language, of our heritage, really truly learning and being proud of where we come from. I think is just as important as rejecting assimilation.
Thank you. And just if you know, who can we reach out to for having the Smithsonian in the National Mall? Is that something that we reach out to our senators, our representatives, or the Smithsonian itself?
So you certainly can reach out to your representatives, but really right now, it's really the Smithsonian. So if you go to like the Smithsonian website, you can find like different emails for people. And so literally it can be like a one-line email, right? I am one of the 60 million Latinos in this country. I want this museum to build on the National Mall. And I mean, you can sort of keep going from there, but I think those things are very specific ways. It really is things like you can tweet at the Smithsonian, you can create an Instagram post and tag the Smithsonian, and sort of really creating this public pressure so that they can't ignore us. Because I do think that many times, many people think that they can ignore us, that we'll just go away. And we've got to let them know, like, no, we're here, and we're not going to be quiet about any of this. So, yeah, please do send those emails. Send a tweet. It really, it's a small action that can actually have a really big impact.
And one thing I wanted to make sure we do before I go on to the next question, and I forgot my copy at home, but do you have a copy of the book that you can hold up so that everyone can see what we're talking about?
Let me get one. Hang on a second. Here it is.
Oh,
this is a book. You sound like a white girl. And just FYI, I did not on purpose get my wall to match my cover.
And I got mine on Amazon. Where else can people buy them?
Yeah, so you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Bookshop, bookshop.org. You can get it on Barnes and Nobles. There's also Audible. I read the book, so it's an Audible and like Libros FM, which is another way to get audiobooks. You can also check it out from your library. So if your library doesn't have it, you can request it and the library will get it for you. It's also on Kindle. So pretty much any way that you want to engage with the book, there's a way to do it. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. So I have another question from Lindsay Sylvia. Many institutions were not created with us in mind. As companies, for example, biotech, are encouraging us to bring our authentic selves to work, what advice do you give to emerging new leaders who have raised that assimilation, who were raised that assimilation was how you succeed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can all create different environments, even within. Sometimes we all work. Sometimes we work in sort of this really big institutions that are really difficult to change, all the way up. But within our team, within the people that we manage, within our own sort of smaller subset of this big institution, we can do things differently, and start sort of creating that change. Even when I think about sort of like creating wealth, and how do we, like, I very much want all Latinos to create wealth. I also want us to create wealth in a way that doesn't replicate oppressive systems, which has been the way that a lot of people in this country have built wealth. And so I think it's just a matter of I think even if you take a step back and you think, what are the ways in which I wish I had been raised differently, grown up differently in a company, and I think a lot of times, well, at least in a place like Wall Street, the idea was like, I went through all this stuff, so the next person has to go through all the stuff. It was almost like a rite of passage type of thing. And I think that we can all sort of like stop that and do things differently.
Yes. So, here's a question, and I'm actually really excited to hear your answer. Can you share briefly about your author publishing journey?
Yeah. So I had a little bit of a different journey publishing, because my first book came on the back of all of these news stories and news articles that were being written about my life. And so I had agents that were reaching out to me asking me, do I want to write a book? And I had always wanted to write a book. And so in some ways it was easier because I had agents reaching out to me. But when you do want to publish a book, that's sort of like the first step, is to get an agent to represent you, because most publishers don't take submissions directly from authors, right? Like, there's sort of an agent who then takes that submission to different publishers. In order to get an agent, one of the things that and this is something that I heard on a panel that I was on recently, and I thought, oh, that's a really good idea. So pretty much like every book, in the back it has acknowledgments, and in those acknowledgments, 100% of the time, the author will thank their agent. They will say, thank you to my agent. Like, it's like you want to thank your agent. And so think about the books that you love and go to the acknowledgments, see who the agent was, find that agent online and send them a message, right? And you want to already have you already want to have sample material, right? So like if you're thinking about writing a book, the first thing you need to do is to sit down and write and have a sample of that thing that you want to write and connect with an agent. There are also programs. There are also sort of first-time author programs. There's an organization called PEN America, PEN America, and they have a bunch of different fellowships for people who are aspiring writers at different levels of their career. So it's not just for like people out of college, it's for people who want to change careers and become authors and become writers. There are different fellowships that will give you mentorship, that'll give you craft lecture talks. I did not go to school to be a writer. I majored in finance. I worked for 10 years in finance. And so I picked up a bunch of books on how to write. I went to different workshops. There's a lot of community colleges that have really, really great workshops and really great classes, like for adults that want to write. And so I took some of those classes. I took workshops at UCLA. I really try to really hone in on my craft. And recently I have not been doing this because there's so much going on, but I do hope to get back to writing every day. Even if what you're writing is terrible, just kind of getting in that practice of writing is sort of a muscle that you can exercise. And then once you have an agent, then that agent will sort of guide you and help you to think through who are the publishers that you're going to go to. And then you sort of go from there.
Thank you for that, for all of our aspiring authors out there. So
I was trying to see, because I'm going to be in Chicago, and I know that a lot of you guys are in Chicago, and I'm going to be at the National Museum of Mexican Art. And I was trying to find the date because it's next week.
oh wow!
I think it's June. I think it's June 9th. Yeah, it's June 9th. So June 9th at 7 p.m. I'll be at the National Museum of Mexican Art, which I'm really excited about. So it'll be an in-person event. So come hang out with me if you are around. I'm going to, so the event at the museum is I'll likely be doing a reading, and then I'll be in conversation, and then I'll be doing a book signing after.
All right. I might join you in Chicago.
Yeah,
I'm in
do.
Milwaukee.
Oh, okay.
It's like a very short train ride away. I just wrote it down.
Oh, there you go. And I think somebody just posted the link to the event. So thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Whoever did that, thank you. All right. I think we have time for probably one or two more questions, because I think we're ending at I think we're actually right about at the end. I'll get one more question in, because this is a really uplifting question, and I think that it's a great question to end on. How did you learn to dream big and keep dreams alive?
I love that question. Just really quick, somebody asked if there's an age limit for the museum event. No, there's not. It's open to everybody. Yeah, I talked about my mom and my dad at the top of the conversation, and how they really taught me and raised me to have so much confidence. And I think that I've always dreamt really big because my parents dreamt really big. Both my mom and my dad had very little education, and yet they had these big dreams for their lives and what they wanted to accomplish in this country. My mom now is 67 years old, and she's 69, actually 69 years old, and she before COVID was enrolled in night classes because she wanted to get her high school diploma. She's like taking computer classes. She wants to have an Etsy store. Like, she still has all of these dreams and ambitions for her life. And so I always just think there's nothing too big for us. There's nothing that's out of reach for any of us. Like, we can dream as big as we want, and those dreams are very much within our reach. Those dreams are really possibilities for us. And I just sort of have to constantly remind myself of everything that's already been done on my behalf, right? Just to think about all the people who had to survive in order for me to be here today. I was thinking about my little brother's name, and my little brother's name is Julio. So he's named after my dad, who's also Julio. And my youngest nephew, is named Julio. And I was thinking about who were the Julios that came before my dad, because I'm sure somebody before my dad was named Julio. And it's like, who are those Julios that came before my dad that made it so that my dad and my brother and my nephew could be in this world. And that just really always inspires me a lot to think that people survived, people fought, people advocated for themselves, for our community, in order for me to be here today. And so there's nothing out of reach. Like, we need to walk into every room in our gorgeous brown bodies like we deserve to be there, because we really, really do.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. I think that was just a lovely way to end our discussion. And thank you so much for being here with us. Thank you for writing the book. It's so important, and I'm just kind of geeking out a little bit that I'm sitting here talking to you.
And I'll see you next week.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much to Asif for everything that y'all do, and for hosting space for this conversation. So thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.